Hello, and welcome to the M.A.G Network. We are happy to have Melia Kelly from Hidden Hilltop Homestead in Kentucky with us. She will be talking about aquaponics, the pros, cons, and their lessons learned. This class is brought to you by the M.A.G Network and is part of our monthly education series. To find out about upcoming online and in-person events, join their Facebook page at www.facebook.com/groups/magnetwork. If you have comments or suggestions for possible upcoming classes, email them at mag.network@outlook.com.
Hello and welcome to the M.A.G Network. I'm Indy Guy, and tonight we're joined by Melia Kelly from Hidden Hilltop Homestead here in Kentucky. She's going to be talking about her family's journey into aquaponics, talking about the different type of systems that's out there, the pros and cons of them, and then what wound up working best for them. So without too much talk, here's Melia. And Melia, welcome and thank you.
All right. Yeah, Indy, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to kind of share, some of the basics of aquaponics and share some of our lessons learned as we have gone through it. It definitely has been a learning experience. And so hopefully I can share some of those things so that if you do decide to get into aquaponics, you don't have to make the same mistakes that I've made. You can make new interesting mistakes and, let me know how those go. Hopefully you won't do any, but. I'm really excited to share kind of what we've learned along the way. So with that, Indy, am I okay to go ahead and start sharing the presentation?
Yes, ma'am. It's all yours until the end.
Okay. All right. Let's see. So we're going to go ahead and share screen. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Looks good on my side, ma'am.
Okay. All right. And I don't know if you want to going, but just so you can see who I am as we start, I'll go ahead and turn on my video and from there. So I'll go ahead and get started. This is an introduction to aquaponics course. I'm going to kind of be going over some of the basics. Like I said, some of the lessons learned. Just really quick before we start, I just wanted to give a huge shout out to Indy and to the entire M.A.G network for putting this together. It's really awesome that they have these kinds of learning experiences. So thank you, Indy, for doing that. Also, huge thank you to everyone who came along. There's no reason to do these classes without people being willing to come and learn. So thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your busy days to join us. It's really great to have you here. So with that, let's go ahead and kick this off. So to start off with, just kind of wanted to get, what exactly is aquaponics? I mean, it's kind of just I think we know kind of the definition of a word, but where the word came from. Basically, it is a combination of two different words. The first one is aquaculture, and aquaculture is basically the growing of fish and other aquatic animals, and it combines aquaculture with hydroponics. And hydroponics is basically the strategy of growing plants without soil. So it takes those two things, puts them together into one system. So that's kind of the overall idea where the word came from and kind of what it is. So aquaculture, yep. So we have our growing fish and aquatic animals, and then the actual hydroponics things. All right, so here's where I get really exciting about what the benefits are of aquaponics, because there are some pretty amazing benefits. One of the really big ones, especially for me, starting off with aquaponics, is lower water consumption. And one of the reasons that I say that is I live in Kentucky, and it is a water-rich area. But for us, we are on a spring system. So our spring only has so much water in it that's being refilled at any one time. And so, we really try to be conscious of how much water we use, especially when, there's not a lot of rainfall. the kids need to go and take showers and everything. If we're watering the garden on top of things, our spring can go dry very, very quickly. So the fact that there's this lower water consumption is actually huge for us. So yeah, so there's some water cost at the beginning. When I say cost, you do have to fill up the tanks and things like that at the very beginning, but there's very, very little water loss once you get it started, because there's not water runoff like a typical in-ground garden. When you water your in-ground garden, not all of that water is going to be taken up by the roots of the vegetables in your garden. Some of it's going to be, run off. Some of it could be used by what I call non-cultivated plants. That's the euphemistic term for weeds, essentially, in your garden. So you don't have to worry about that kind of consumption coming with part of aquaponics. In fact, I read one study that showed that aquaponics uses up to 90% less water than traditional gardening or farming. So you consider 90% less. That's a huge reduction in water costs. So even if you're not in an area that has, a lot of rainfall and things like that, it actually can be a better use of your water resources. Another one of the big benefits of aquaponics is you have reduced fertilizer needs, or maybe no fertilizer needs, because the idea behind it is that the fish waste that's created is what actually feeds the plants. So you don't have to have other inputs other than what is naturally created by your fish. The next thing, and this is kind of another thing that's pretty cool, is the smaller footprints. Basically, you get more product, and this product is both plants and meat. And you get more of that product in a smaller acreage than you would be with a traditional kind of in-ground garden or traditional pond, things like that. It's kind of just that idea that you can do it in much smaller space. And then kind of one of my big ones is it is a force multiplier. So I'm sorry, that sounds really buzzwordy, but I think force multiplier is a really cool idea. And I think that aquaponics is a really good representation of what a force multiplier can be. So what I mean by this is that with aquaponics, because of the way that it's set up, you don't have to spend time weeding. You don't have to spend as much time doing debugging and things like that. You also don't have, some of the overall maintenance that an in-ground garden would take. Also, depending on your setup, so this can vary somewhat, but a lot of times you'll end up having a longer growing season with your aquaponics, especially if you have a greenhouse and you have some sort of supplemental life. So, whatever your growing season could be in a traditional in-ground garden, having an system in a smaller footprint so you can put it into a greenhouse, things like that, then you can kind of extend the life event of when you can produce things within it. So that's a pretty big force multiplier to me. All right, so go ahead and move on. And I'm sorry, the way that I see this, I don't think I've missed anything. If I have missed any questions or anything like that, please feel free to jump in and let me know, but I'll go ahead and keep going. Okay, so I just waxed poetic about the benefits of aquaponics, but it's not balanced to just talk about the benefits. There are some cons that anytime you choose to do something, you definitely want to look at the cons as well, so you can kind of go into it with an open mind. So one of the bigger cons for aquaponics is just the upfront cost, right? So one of the things that I love about kind of traditional gardening is that you can get like a 20-cent packet of seeds, put it in some dirt and use a little bit of water, and you can get a huge return on your investment. Like there's little upfront cost with that. So that's a benefit of traditional gardening. With aquaponics, there's going to be a lot more upfront cost because you have to have the infrastructure in place in order to do that. So that's one of the cons. You're going to be putting more into that kind of front. So that's something to bear in mind. The other kind of con to aquaponics is that you're going to be dealing with power usage. And a lot of the power usage is going to come in the form of some of your pumps for your fish tanks, and running the water from the fish tank up through the grow medium and things like that, if you have any supplemental light. So there is going to be kind of that aspect where it's not kind of the more passive that some of your other types of forms are. So you have that, yeah, the power usage. And probably one of the bigger cons too is this last one, and that is maintenance. Anytime you have any of these systems that are in place, they have to have upkeep, and things can break down, you have to replace them. So maintenance is going to become a much bigger issue than what you get again in something like an in-ground garden or just a traditional pond with fish in it. So those are the biggest cons, that at least in my. But that said, I still do think the pros outweigh the cons, obviously. So because that's why. Okay. All right. So now we're going to be going now into what actually can go into your aquaponics system. So one of the first things about aquaponics is going to be your animals, your fish and other aquatic animals that can be in an aquaponics system. And there are a few different options. And again, there are kind of different considerations about why you might have some of these things in your system. Now, for the fish, the two types of fish that I see most commonly in systems are tilapia and bluegill, and we'll kind of talk in those a little bit more depth in just a second, but I don't want you to think that those are the only ones. You literally can do aquaponics with a goldfish if you want to, right? I mean, you probably won't want to eat the goldfish necessarily, but you literally can do it. If you want to have a very small aquaponics system in your house, you can do that. But that said, so tilapia and bluegill are the ones that you see most commonly. So what are the benefits to these ones? So tilapia, one of the big benefits to tilapia is that they are better producers. They grow quickly, they spawn quickly, so that production is going to be quite quick with tilapia. That's the real benefit to tilapia. However, bluegill, so the bluegill is another one of the ones, and the real benefits to bluegill is that they can tolerate a much wider range of temperatures, including quite cold temperatures. And I will talk in a little bit about how big of a deal that can be, and we'll kind of get into that. But so really kind of keep that in mind of, you're going for absolute production, or do you want them to be able to be a little bit more hardy kind of thing, and which ones you decide to use in your system. And then another kind of aquatic animal that you can use in aquaponics are things like prawn and crayfish. So these can be good additions. I wouldn't necessarily consider them as kind of the sole animals in an aquaponics system, but they're good additions, especially because they can help clean some of the bottom waste away. But one of the things to bear in mind is they cannot be as kind of crowded and still thrive. They need to have a lot more space to be able to spread out. Both tilapia and bluegill can actually thrive still in smaller, more confined environments and be perfectly happy and healthy. Prawns and crayfish are not so much. So you're not gonna be able to have kind of as much of that throughput, but you will get a lot kind of cleaner tank. So, okay, so here's the lessons learned. So I talked about the difference between tilapia and bluegill. So when we first started, we went with tilapia. We really wanted kind of that quick to maturity, quick to spawn, kind of quick turnaround time. So we went with tilapia. However, they really do require warmer temperatures. So we are in Kentucky. Our aquaponics setup is in a greenhouse, but in the wintertime, especially at night, the sun goes down. If you don't have a way to supplementally heat that greenhouse overnight, if those temperatures drop too much, you can lose your fish. And that is in fact what happened to us. We ended up losing some of our tilapia. So yeah, there was a real cold spell that came through. We weren't quite anticipating it. We weren't set up. So that was definitely a hard lesson learned for us. So right now we are in the process of changing over to bluegill, which, like I said, so slower growing, but they can handle those much wider ranges of temperature, including much colder. And we've decided that we really want to have kind of that extra buffer of being able to, for them to be able to handle some of that. Now, in future, will we look at, perhaps supplemental heating? That's something that we're kicking around the idea of, but we really kind of want to move forward with our bluegill and see how that goes. Another kind of lesson learned that from what we did when we ordered our tilapia, we ordered them in as what's called fry, so just the very small fish. They come there, they're really small. And the real benefit to doing the fry is that it's much cheaper. Obviously, you can get a lot more of them. It's easier to ship them. So there's some benefits there, but kind of the downside to doing that is that from them to get from fry stage to actual reproduction and potential harvest is a lot longer. So you have kind of that delayed gratification while you just kind of wait for them to get to that point. So now with our bluegill, instead of buying them as fry, we ended up getting a full breeding colony. So they're already mature. 2 males, 3 females per package is how they came in the breeding colony that we're getting right now. They're already ready to the females are at egg-laying status, so you can start replenishing your stock right away. So that's kind of, again, so what I like about that is that we're quicker to there, and there's less of a chance of failure from the get-go. So anyway, lessons learned. All right, so and move on. Okay, so we talked about the kind of animals that you can grow in aquaponics. So let's talk now about the type of plants that you can grow in aquaponics. There really are a wide range of plants. Now, probably my favorite ones to grow in aquaponics and some of the ones that really do some of the best are your leafy greens. So when I say leafy greens, I'm talking about things like spinach and arugula, things like that. They grow really well. They get all the nutrients. They're just, it's a really good medium for those types of plants to grow. Other types of things that grow really well, kind of similarly, but things like herbs. So we're talking things like basil and parsley, oregano, things like that. So not necessarily something you'd have an entire salad of, but it's really great to flavor your meals and things like that. So those are another thing to do really good. Now, some of the ones that it takes a little bit more work to get to work, but they can do really well if you have the structures in place, are things like tomatoes and peppers. So things to make that you have, if you want to do tomatoes and peppers in your aquaponics, is you need to ensure you have a good support system for the plants to make sure that there's not too much pressure on the roots. Because the way that aquaponic systems are set up, the roots a lot of times are just sitting in kind of the water medium. They don't have soil all around them to kind of hold it all up. And so in order to be able to grow up, they need to have support structure around them. So think like tomato cages for like tomatoes, but you'd also need it for your peppers as well. So that's kind of one of the big things with those, is make sure they have a thing to kind of rest on, so they're not relying on those roots that are just kind of dangling in the water. So. Okay, so let's kind of talk about, we're going to kind of get into some of the nitty gritty of how this works and why it works and what you need to have in place for all of these things to work. So actually the biggest components, so we talked about the fish, we talked about the plants, and those are the biggest, most visual components of aquaponics. But the thing that really, really makes aquaponics work at its core is beneficial bacteria. In the context of aquaponics, bacteria are your friend. And I'll kind of go through why I'm saying that. So why is it that bacteria are your friend? Okay, so ammonia is created from the fish waste. Anytime you have an overload of waste, there's going to be kind of ammonia that's created in the water. So what happens with that ammonia in the water? There's a type of bacteria called nitrosomonas. and they will take that ammonia and it converts that ammonia into nitrites. Then there's another type of bacteria called nitrobacter. And nitrobacter will take those nitrites and will convert the nitrites into nitrates. And nitrates is the golden stuff. That's the stuff that you want, because plants grow very, very rapidly when they have access to nitrates. So this is kind of giving them, it's not just like just any kind of food. This is like almost like a shot in the arm of like really good food direct to the roots by having the fish waste being converted into the nitrates for the plants. So, all right. So next we're going to go into some of the different setup components. Now, there's a lot of different types of aquaponics components, a lot of different ways, but at its most basic, there's going to be 3 things that you absolutely must have in your aquaponics component. And the first thing is the fish tank. Right? You need to have a thing that can hold water and that can hold the fish. So in this kind of system, you have the fish tank there at the bottom. Then the next thing that you're going to need is a plant grow area. And then you're going to need some way of moving the water from the tank through the grow area. So this is kind of, that seems kind of, and that is pretty simplistic, but there's a lot of different ways to make that work. So we'll kind of go through some of the different types and how these 3 systems come together. So here's kind of a more complex system diagram. It just kind of shows how things can go through. I just kind of wanted to show, so those 3 components are at its most simple, but it can become a little bit more complicated than that as things kind of go into these different arenas. So I won't sit here and go through each of those. I think it's fairly self-explanatory, but again, these slides will be made available afterwards if you kind of want to go through each of these and kind of read through each part. But okay, what I wanted to go through now is, so those are the different basic types of components, but I want to talk about different types of aquaponic systems, because there are very different types of systems that could be made to work that do it differently, even with, though those are the that's the overall theme and how it works, there's different ways to put it together, I guess, if that makes sense. So let's start with media. Now, media is the most common type of aquaponic system. It's also known as what's called a flood and drain. So basically the idea is that you will take the water, deliver it to the roots, and then drain it away so that the roots don't just sit in the water all the time. So in a media, it's called media because you use grow media to support the crops. So you can see in this is the crops up here. They're in the media. You have your tank down here, and then the water goes through and circulates through to feed the crops. So that's it. The next one is the raft. Now the raft is pretty cool because it doesn't require quite as much. Basically, it kind of uses something, this is, I think, even just like styrofoam with things cut through it. And it allows the plants to kind of float on top of the water. So it's actually also known as a floating system. And with a raft, this is best for smaller plants with less need for support. So this is going to be things for like your small leafy greens, etc. Then the next one is an NFT system, also known as a nutrient film technique. And what this does is it uses hydroponic grow channels. So each of these little pipes here, that is what distributes the water along to all of the roots. And then kind of the last one, oops, sorry, I moved forward too quick, is kind of hybrid systems. And as it sounds, hybrids are basically multiple types of systems that can work together. And one of the other types of techniques that I like quite a bit is a thing called a Dutch bucket. It's also known as a Beto bucket or Batto bucket. I'm not quite sure what the exact pronunciation for that is, but the Dutch bucket system utilizes smaller containers. A lot of times, like it says, buckets. And one of the real benefits to doing a Dutch bucket system is it's very, very scalable. You can start off on a very small scale and then build and scale over time. Okay. All right. So here we have kind of this one right here. This is what's known as a chop and flip. So you have kind of this thing right here. Normally it would be one solid container, but you chop it up on this top part of it. You flip it over. So you have your grow on the top and you have your fish tank on the bottom. And then you have piping going through. So the different parts of the system, and I apologize. So I was going to see, I thought I had different parts of the system, but I think you can pretty much see it. So you have grow bed on the top on here. This is the grow bed here. This is the fish tank down here. And there's your piping to connect them all together. Okay. All right. So one of the things that I did want to make sure that I talked about, because I don't know about you guys, maybe it's just me, but I like things to look pretty. Don't always look pretty. Sometimes you just need to get things done, but you don't have to just have things that look industrial, or, you know, it doesn't have to be just plastic things everywhere. You can have aquaponics that look quite nice. And these are just some examples of ones that I thought were quite nice and that kind of show that you can have some of these things almost disguised, and even the container itself be just aesthetically pleasing. So. Right. Okay. All right. So what I wanted to do at this point is go through kind of a walkthrough of the systems that we have ourselves. So you can see kind of what we've set up, and you can also kind of, just so you can see kind of what we've been working with. All right. So we have 3 different aquaponics systems here. Talked about the chop and flip. That's this blue thing in the back. This is our version of it here. Here we have the float medium right there. And then we also have a bog system right there. Then down here, this is the fish tank. This is actually submerged in the ground. You can't tell. This is a larger tub. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So my husband was pointing, I was saying it wrong. So this is the fish tank right here in this ICV tub. And then this is the sump down here, but it's actually down in the ground. Okay. So fish tank here, sump right here. This is why my husband has to be here. So what I do. Okay. All right. So that is that system. And I don't see any questions. So we'll go ahead. Move on. Okay, so this shows a little bit more of the chop and flip. You can also see on this one, in our grow medium, we actually just have kind of these gravel rocks here as a way to support the roots. It doesn't have to be that. It can be, you know, the clay pebbles, things like that, but it's really there to kind of just support that root structure. Then here is our Batto bucket system. So again, you can see that these are just these small buckets that all have this channel connecting. This is what delivers the water, and it can go back and forth. And then this is our hydroponic system. So this is one, my husband created this all from scratch, just going to like Home Depot, Lowe's, and getting some of these different pipes, cutting them in place and putting these all in. And then these are little containers that have holes along the sides so that the water can flow through and get to all of the roots on the inside of these right here. Okay. All right. Okay. So this is this is one of the things, hot tip time, and this is probably something more for me than for anyone else. Hot tip, write it down. There's a lot to remember with some of these things. Things like remembering what pH is right, what sort of water temperature you need from the different types of fishes and things like that. So if you have something, if you need to remember these things, just write it down, keep that in the location where you can see it as you're doing things actively, so you don't have to go and look for it otherwise, and it will help you save some time. And again, this might be a hot tip for me, but I figured I would go ahead and share it all with you. I think there's Okay, so investigating financials show what level it's okay for self-sufficiency, homestead versus a more business-oriented approach. So I think that is a very, very valid question. And I have not sat down and actually worked through the financials to see where that break-even point is. So are you looking for more self-sufficiency or more business oriented? Are you interested in either one of those over the other, or? I think it would be a lot easier to reach kind of when a break even for your own use would be than it would be to actually start making money. But no, I have not actually sat down and run through that. But I think that is a very good thing, and now I actually kind of want to do that. I think probably, and sorry, I'm just thinking out loud now. I imagine some of the things that you'd have to do is kind of price out the cost for fish or equivalent meats that you might be eating, and then also vegetables and greens and equivalent and what those costs would be, and then kind of compare it to what you get out of the garden and things like that. So looking at feed or fodder for livestock, what kind of feed or fodder for livestock would you consider growing in something like this? Green plants. Okay. Leafy greens. Okay, yeah. So for leafy greens, yeah, I think it definitely would be pretty good. And once you get past the initial overhead of building the system itself, the actual seeds for your leafy greens won't take very much overhead. So once you have that initial one, getting to profitability after that, I think would be not quite as time intensive. But yeah, it would definitely take some time to sit down and crunch the numbers on that. They looked at power requirements during a prolonged power outage. No, I have not. So for small power outages, you're not going to have like total failure during a small power outage. But for prolonged ones, that certainly would be a concern. There are some things that you could potentially do manpower wise to kind of keep things going during a prolonged power outage, kind of manually moving the water through the channels as needed. But so my husband's saying backup air pumps is what you would need during prolonged air power outages. So the backup air pumps, would those be battery powered? How are those?
We have an actual one that's working off solar.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So yeah, my husband's saying battery backup, and we have one that operates off solar too. So, okay, good questions. Any other questions before go on? Okay. All right. And actually, so that is the part that I have. I think I actually talked a little bit faster than I had anticipated. So we'll go ahead and stop the screen share now because we're just to the question part of things. So are there any other questions that the group has for me or for the group as a whole?
Can you explain just a second? Your husband was saying air, so it's not just a regular water pump that flows the water. It's actually compressed air. Can you explain on that just a little bit? What actually does the circulating of the water?
Yeah. What do you need?
So, hi everybody. So, okay, so in the system you need a water pump and usually you try to have one water pump to run the whole system. And so you'll have one water pump that pumps the water through all the grow beds and your Dutch buckets and everything else. But then you also need air pumps, and an air stone in with your fish to keep them,
Okay.
to keep the air levels, oxygen levels up for the fish.
Okay, that makes sense now. I wasn't thinking about that, but yeah, that makes sense now. I got you.
Yeah, with the water flowing down into the fish tank, it'll usually stir it up enough that it'll get the air into there. But throwing an couple extra air stones in there with an air pump really helps out, and it also helps out with the roots of the plants. It keeps them from getting the root rot.
Right. So you feel comfortable though that one of the systems that Melia showed of y'all's could be easily run off of solar power alone if needed be?
That's what we're working on right now. For just the air stones, it will run off of solar. I've got one that has a small little battery backup. It'll keep it going for a day or so just on solar panel or solar power.
Does the water circulation pumps, could it be set on something that it like runs for so long, shuts off, runs for so long, shut off? That might be a possibility.
Yeah, you could definitely put it on a timer so that it runs on the timer. One thing is with the flood and drain system, where it floods up, the water level comes up to a certain level and then the sump kicks in and drops it. So you usually have that running full time. But you could have it, and that's what we're eventually going with, is to get the whole system set up on the solar panels so
Okay,
that
cool.
nothing's running off of the grid. So
That would be really handy if something happens, just like the issue over in North Carolina, where there was some apparent actual intended damage done to those substations, and you got 34,000 homes without power. So
yeah, and that's what we're trying to go with on our whole homestead, is to eventually go with solar and other backup power systems. So we're going to still be tied into the grid here, but we're not totally relying on it. It's like, as far as like heating our greenhouse where the fish are and doing the heating of the water. So we've got a central boiler that's out there next to it, and I'm going to run a heat exchanger into the boiler so that it with a little thermostat on that to circulate the water to keep my water temperatures at a right temperature for the fish on that.
oh, that's cool.
And have that ran off of the actual central boiler.
That's a good idea. Okay. Any other questions, anyone? All right, ma'am. We really appreciate everything. That was some great information, a great PowerPoint. Any last words, comments, thoughts that you want to throw out there?
Nothing for me, just I guess reiterate what I said at the beginning. Thank you everyone for taking time out of your day. Thank you, Indy, for organizing this. It was a real pleasure.
I hope you found this class beneficial and that it gives you a good starting point towards your journey in aquaponics. We have a lot more learning opportunities coming in 2023. We'll be hosting 2 virtual Zoom classes each month, as well as adding some additional interviews and custom content on our YouTube channel. We still have one more great class this year. Dr. Jen with Dillman Wellness will be with us Wednesday, December 14th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. She will be discussing meds you should be stockpiling for worst case scenario. In addition to the Zoom classes, we have 3 great in-person learning and fellowship opportunities in 2023. We have the Patriot Homesteaders Conference, April 28th through the 30th at the Scott County Fairgrounds in Scottsburg, Indiana. We have the Kentucky Bushcraft Weekend, July 21st through the 23rd at Double J Stables in Mammoth Cave, Kentucky. We also have the Heartland Homesteading Conference, September 29th through October 1st at Home Place on the Green River in Campbellsville, Kentucky. We are also working on some other opportunities for learning and fellowship, so be sure to join one of our Facebook groups. We will post links to all the above events at the end of the video. Again, I want to thank Melia Kelly from Hidden Hilltop Homestead for opening up her home to us. On behalf of the MAG Network, I am Indy Guy. Be safe and have the knowledge.